Now, families who have lost loved ones to gambling addiction are urging the government to publish its long-awaited review of the UK's betting laws.
Yes, the so-called white paper was commissioned around 2 years ago, but has been delayed 4 times. Ministers have told BBC Breakfast it will be published within weeks, but campaigners say the longer it takes, the more lives will be damaged. As Jane McCubbin reports.
The beautiful game used to be so simple.
So what are you betting on?
Raving corners, cards, you name it.
Not anymore.
I put £5 a month into an online gambling software, which told me about the amount of fouls players do and yellow cards.
Yeah, it's a 7-fold goals galore. Need both teams to score. I've got 3 in at the minute.
Let's place a little bet on this afternoon's game.
Gambling has never been easier, and some say riskier.
It's all about the next goal.
There have been government attempts to make it safer, but a long-promised overhaul of gambling laws is still nowhere to be seen.
Practice a little bit. Good man. Best to get round there.
We've come to Tranmere Rovers to meet 3 men who say government inaction is costing lives.
So this is Ryan.
That's Ryan on our last holidays together. We came home on the Friday and killed himself on a Sunday afternoon.
John's son Ryan had a gambling addiction. He was 27 when he killed himself.
He tried to stop, he tried to get off. But one of the things he said again was the adverts. When I try to get off, I can't get away from it. It's everywhere. As soon as I'm finished, they're texting me straight away, offer me free bets. It's the part of, for me, it's part of the grooming to get him in there.
The visibility for you is a form of grooming.
It's a form of grooming.
That could have been my mum sitting there.
James is a recovering addict.
And I just feel angry, actually, that gambling advertising is still allowed in football when we know it's killing people.
Both the betting industry and those who run football insist there's no link between gambling adverts and addiction. Here at League Two Tranmere, they fundamentally disagree.
The game itself, I think, is an absolutely ideal platform that is being used and exploited by the gambling community to the detriment of our community. We were approached to put terminals in the ground and we didn't. The difficulty is we can say no to that, but the actual terminals are in everybody's phone, in everybody's hand.
What would you say to the people watching this saying, but you don't restrict the whole drink sector because alcoholics exist?
If you're an alcoholic trying to stop drinking, you don't have the local barman come round your house and give you 100 free shots of vodka. This is not about stopping people gambling, this is stopping exploitative gambling.
Peter Shilton spent 30 years as a professional footballer and 35 years as a gambling addict.
I mean, when I started gambling, it was sort of in the 70s and it was a totally different ball game. You know, 3 high street bookmakers you used to have an account with. The whole industry has changed completely.
I opened Peter's bank statement and added up what he'd lost in a month, and I actually had an anxiety attack. Oh my God, this is chronic. He's really ill.
When I finished playing football, you know, it became more and more, especially when the internet gambling came on. And I hate to see the way that football's being used to promote gambling, and especially for youngsters. It's down to the government to stand up now since 2005 and make some serious changes. And if they don't, there's only one reason, and that is because of money.
This is an industry which has changed beyond all recognition, and the 2005 Gambling Act took shape before any of this really existed. The white paper to play catch-up, well, that has been shelved 4 times, and it's been through the hands so far of 5 different ministers.
On course, bookmakers are perhaps the only part of the gambling industry which has stayed almost the same, and this sector believes a sense of urgency is desperately needed.
Introduction of the Gambling Act 2005 probably left the door open for a bit of a free-for-all. Perhaps the government needs to take back a bit of that control.
The Betting and Gaming Council say they support the gambling review as an opportunity to raise standards, but any changes introduced by the government must not drive gamblers towards the growing unsafe, unregulated black market. All eyes are now on Paul Scully, who, as the 5th Minister at the helm, has promised to finally publish the white paper within weeks. Jane McCubbin, BBC News.
We're joined here in the studio now by Liz and Charles Ritchie, whose son Jack took his own life after struggling with a gambling addiction, and Will Prochaska, who is the Strategy Director at Gambling with Lives. Liz, if I'd come to you first.
Thank you
so much for coming back in. I know we've spoken to you before about this. Tell me how that is for you today, watching that report from Jane, and how frustrated you might be feeling.
To be honest, angry, actually, because, you know, our son took his life after real struggles and he was misled. The information is so misleading that there's not many people who are struggling, and when he first went into the bookies, when he was underage, with his friends from school, big party of them, going into the bookies, he thought it was safe. Why would he not? It was badged as being a bit of fun. And that's the point about it being misleading. You know, it's badged as being a leisure pursuit. It's not. It's the sale of an addictive product. And some of these products have a higher addiction and at-risk rate than heroin. And after Jack died, we set up Gambling with Lives because we saw so many families struggling with this. And we wanted to make sure that other families don't suffer like we suffer every day. And I've spoken to so many bereaved mums. And, you know, they always say, my heart is broken. And I don't want to have to keep doing that, you know, and we can stop this. We can stop this. But it's up to the government. I mean, when are we going to get this?
Yeah, and Charles, that's the question, isn't it? Delayed, as we said, 4 times. What difference, assuming it does finally get delivered, what difference would better control, better regulation make? And what would it have changed for you and your family?
Well, I think number one is it will stop some of the deaths. You know, there's now solid research which shows there's at least 1 death a day due to gambling-related suicide. That is that's the key thing as to why we must have regulation. And actually the regulation that is proposed won't affect the betting experience of the vast majority of people. It's very much targeted on the unsafe forms of gambling and getting interventions before people have problems. So, you know, we're 3 main things I think we want to see. One is getting affordability checks introduced so that before people get to a stage where they're having serious problems, they have a proper intervention. We want to see an end to gambling advertising. That will be enormously popular with the public. It's what normalises gambling. As Liz says, you know, it's portrayed as this fun activity. And then we also want to see a statutory levy, because at the moment the gambling industry pays as little as they like to whoever they like to pay for research, education and treatment. And that means that they have a huge influence over all aspects of that. So effectively we've got the gambling industry teaching kids about gambling in schools.
And Will, how difficult is it to persuade the gambling industry to change the way they work?
It's almost impossible.
Yeah.
And actually the Gambling Commission have recently increased both the frequency and the scale of the fines against gambling operators. So since September, over £20 million has been levied in fines against operators for doing things such as Betfred took £180,000 off of somebody in a short period of time. I think somebody gambled £70,000 over a 10-hour period, and they were fined for not doing any checks in terms of source of funds or social responsibility checks. Betway were found to be advertising on children's colouring in pages and were fined hundreds of thousands of pounds for that. But the problem is that these operators see that as a cost of doing business. So the industry's business model is based on addiction. About 90% of their profits come from 5% of customers who are either addicted or at risk. So the fines are just a cost of doing business for them, and really they need to be afraid that their licences will be removed before they change their ways. We desperately need the government's white paper to force them to change their business model.
And well, it's interesting, Charles saying this isn't about trying to change the experience for people who are gambling. It's not about changing the way that they gamble, but this is about tighter regulation of what they do and who is able to do it. I suppose the question is whether this pushes it underground a little bit. Is there a danger that it would prompt a black market in gambling? Because when we hear those words addiction, that's often what happens, isn't it?
That's certainly the argument which the gambling companies want to put forward, and it really kind of replicates what the tobacco industry did when we saw stronger tobacco control. They said, oh, well, people just smuggle in more cigarettes when you tax cigarettes more. It's just a cynical ploy by a really harmful industry. And actually, the CEO of the Gambling Commission himself, is becoming really frustrated and has said on many occasions that he's tired of hearing the gambling operators overplay the threat of the black market as a way to try and resist regulation. So it's a distraction, quite frankly, and really the operators need to come good and start acting responsibly.
OK, let's Sorry, go on, Charles.
It's really important to remember as well that the harms which are being done today, the hundreds of deaths, the tens of thousands of addictions, the millions of lives ruined, are being done by the regulated industry. It's not the black market. We cannot have the spectre of the black market preventing change which will save lives.
I'm going to bring this in because I want to get your reply to it, actually, Liz. A statement from the Betting and Gaming Council, which we have had, says betting advertising and sponsorship must comply with strict guidelines and safer gambling messaging. It's regularly and prominently displayed. The Betting and Gaming Council's largest members pledged an additional £100 million of funding between 2019 and 2023 for research, education and treatment services to tackle problem gambling.
Yeah, it went on to say the regulated betting and gaming industry provides some of the country's most popular sport with vital funding, including the English Football League. So it says we strongly support the Gambling Review as a further opportunity to raise standards and promote safer gambling. But any changes, it says, introduced by the government must not drive gamblers towards the unsafe, unregulated black market. And Liz and Charles, I can see you're shaking your head.
I mean, there you have it, don't you? It's framed as a leisure pursuit. There is no serious perception of the scale of the addiction. And the coroner at our son's inquest said that information was woeful. And statements like this actually are part of that. And I mean, I'm sure Will talk about the education for schools. You know,
it's deeply concerning, actually. The more money that the gambling industry gives on a voluntary basis to provide education and treatment, the worse things get. And there was a Cambridge University study which assessed the gambling industry's influenced education materials that most of the children in this country will receive, and it found that they problematized children, shifted blame away from the industry onto children, and basically masked the industry's role in the harm that it creates, and it normalised gambling. So we've got this ridiculous situation. We wouldn't allow tobacco companies to educate children about the risks of smoking. Why are we allowing gambling companies to go into our schools and effectively teach children that gambling is normal and that if you have a problem, it's your fault and not ours?
How confident are you you'll get this legislation?
I think something will come. I mean, it was in the Conservative manifesto 3 years ago, with thousands of deaths since then.
We know that there was a white paper ready for publication almost on the day when Boris Johnson resigned. We do know that that had been watered down by unelected advisers at Number 10. So we're hoping and expecting actually that the current government is going to actually strengthen the original white paper. So we're positive about it, but it needs to happen now.
Here's hoping. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us again. Liz, Charles and Will, thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having us.
And if you have been affected by any of the issues we've talked about this morning, you can find help and advice at bbc.co.uk/actionline.